TradeNBI.com. This is John. This report is for the 31st, the last day of the month. Well, you can see we had talked about this from that original signal. We had the brief little dip here, but magenta still stayed above, and it has stayed above yellow on the NBI throughout this entire run, even with the brief stint of white popping its head up there. Was still within a positive. Now, the next round of a white pop, though, is definitely going to have much more significant consequence. But we can see that we had the steel dip below Cyan, very bullish from that standpoint. And Cyan moved above the steel here on the DOC. That's a little bit more bearish from the soft standpoint. What we were in was a rising red overall, as well as shakeout. Moving to the positive side needs to stay again to that positive because of fade there, and you've got real problems. We were slightly negative before, just under one. It's beginning the early market here in positive territory from a shakeout standpoint, and you can see orange dipping, and that's potentially creating the steel moving back above. So short-term buyers, they had faded quite a bit through most of this like middle consolidation after a brief pump. But as I was pointing out before, lockup periods and everything are about to end, and this sort of forces those new buyers to have to pay a little bit more from that standpoint. Um, and whether or not there'll be new selling into it. Again, when you have this kind of move, you can get as much as a third dip to half, and you'd still be fine within that general space. So not horrible. And from an NQ standpoint, which had been a little bit weaker in general because it had broken below the yellow MBI, but came back with that strong performance on the S&P and much clean. Well, I was almost going to say nicer, but it's not really nicer, and it's just a little bit more separation, so it's easier to see that orange dip and move below that red DOC along with the new cyan. I mean, the green moving above red. You're on your way for another potential decent run on a higher pivot level from a DOC red standpoint, which has to maintain itself. Otherwise, it will see weakness in the euro. Still trying to get to that parity issue. Again, there's been some coordinated support since we were back down in the lower part, and that has really given strength to a lot of these things. Of course, the ECB raised rates whopping three quarters. Whether any of that is sustainable, unlikely. You know, you just had the issue with Russia canceling its approval of the grain deal with Ukraine. That's going to put additional pressure on prices. And that's where you get into that stagflation category where things are still moving along enough, but everything still keeps getting more expensive. Uh, it's led to a little bit more softness in gold because, again, that leads to uh, later deflationary setups. But the question becomes when any of the currency issues start to develop. But as long as oil's high, I don't see that being much of a problem because, again, it just means more countries need more US dollars in order to buy these goods as they're transferred. We are seeing MBI white spike here for oil, but as long as that magenta is still riding above yellow and rising, not going to go anywhere but up or stay where it is. So that continues to put pressure and a little bit of softness at this expectation that maybe bond market moved a little too far too fast. And that was just because of the apocalyptic nature of realizing that the Fed is still going to tighten until they get their inflationary number. Of course, now they're floating again, that secondary item. We talked about it many months ago that the Fed would just change their target for inflation instead of 2%, move it up to 3.5, maybe go to 4. Any of those would help because you're still a heck of a long way. But again, it takes by the time the Fed actions 4 6 months before they start to have their full impact. And so when you keep doing them successfully, you don't know that you've gone too far until it's too late. But if you wait too long, which they already waited too long, because that's why we were talking about at the beginning of the year, they should have done this, and you would have known by now whether or not you had gone too far too fast. But They don't care. Bitcoin, like I said, was the case was building for strength in there. Back up to the 20 and a half handle there. Not bad. Could have been a stronger spike, but again, you're not seeing any market, meltdown, so to speak. So you don't have that big flood into it. Um, question was whether or not there were certain elements in China that, with the concentration of power taking place, we're going to try and convert into Bitcoin, and that's been squelched pretty hard by the Chinese in general. From an ETH standpoint, I think it's a little healthier. You can see that it's a pretty strong move there, but given from where it's come from down this steep angle, we've gotten to a very compressed Morganacci lines right here. It's pretty tight within that. But as those squeeze, eventually they have to expand. And from the 50K standpoint, you can see the turnaround with that. And yeah, Magenta had the red leading at the beginning, but then the Magenta took over. Well, it was just right over here at the 23%. And then everything just started to coalesce. You had green over DOC, orange dip, nice clean run. No question about it. Intraday, again, I think it's pretty good. Earlier, we had lots of ranges back and forth, but a lot of these runs were pretty darn clean and just follow that cyan under red most of the way through there. When it did come up, we were just some brief dips, but it spent an awful lot of time with cyan under red, which is always a buy, except for under a couple of circumstances. So all in all, there you have it. You can see the pre-market opening up here right now, and while that's opened, we're getting a little bit of fill back into some of these positive extremes, and we might get a few more of those to continue. And when that's done, we'll get a real clear idea of any market turnaround and how much needs to fill back for comfort levels, and we may see us going back into some of these other previous algo levels before, and the start of this last set of positive extremes was just a little bit lower at the 38.81. So a lot of time before the market opens, so we'll see how that plays out. As always, though, trade well. Look for me on the Skype chat. Talk to you later.